Thank you, Chris. As folks are coming in, let me just take a point of personal privilege, if I can, please. And that is just from the staff at the IIANC, a special welcome to all of you. But thank you to our committee who has worked so diligently to this event. Thank you for your attendance, your support, our company folks, our company partners, industry friends. Thank you so much. I can attest to you that success has really been exampled by the full house that we've had today and will continue to have tomorrow. So again, thank you so much for all of your participation in being here. If you will, this is a very, very important topic, especially as we look into this session of the North Carolina General Assembly. And if you will, let me just again take some personal privilege in trying to kind of set the stage about this particular issue of auto rate modernization. It is a very hot topic. It is a very hot topic within what I would describe the family of IIANC. And I'll use our commissioner's constant message that he gives in a lot of speaking venues, and that is we can be family and still disagree because family members do disagree. Many of you received a letter from our company friends, our company partners from GMAC, stating their opposition to IIANC support of an auto rate modernization bill. Let me say this. GMAC is a wonderful, wonderful supporter of our association. Rick, Art, Mark, Richie, the others, I can't say enough good things about how they support our organization, how they support our young agents. And we'll remain friends whether or not whatever happens to this bill. But I think, honestly, there are some things from IIANC's point of view that I need to make you aware of before we actually get into the talks of auto rate modernization. First of all, and Stuart's going to talk a little bit more about the bill at the conclusion of our dialogue here, but the bill that will be introduced in the North Carolina General Assembly, first of all, is not a state farm bill. And IIANC has never been supportive of a state farm specific bill. 2 years ago, we were supportive of a bill that basically does what we're trying to do in this bill, in this session of the legislature, and that is incremental change of what we think is a very archaic system of rate making, especially when you compare it to the 49 other states within the nation. Second of all, the bill does not abolish the rate bureau. The bill does not abolish the facility. The bill does not take away powers of the insurance commissioner. The bill does not prohibit a company to file within the rate bureau. A company can still file within the rate bureau. So please know, as we have these discussions ongoing, and it's a very sincere debate on both sides, and so again, I'm very aware of their support and how they their point of view is on the bill. Basically, I call them the big three, but it's the GMAC, it's Nationwide, and it's Farm Bureau on one side of the bill in opposition to it, and then it's IIANC and a lot of other companies that you actually do business with here in the state of North Carolina. So we'll talk about that a little bit more, but I did want to talk about that since some communication had already been extended to some of you that are attending this meeting. I'll say this in a lighthearted way. Art Lyon and I are very good friends, and we had a discussion about this prior to my coming up. And I said, Art, I can say this, I'm the old Baptist, you know, and I said, I really appreciate GMAC sending out those letters because it really created a lot of excitement for this convention. It's kind of like a Baptist preacher, you know, once the membership finds out you're about to fire the preacher, everybody turns up at the church. Well, that's kind of the way this thing has been. So GMAC, I say thank you for that as well. So anyway, we've got to have a little fun with the seriousness of the matter. So, without further ado, I want to welcome several, I think, experts to our panel discussion today as it relates to auto modernization. We'll talk a little bit about property, but auto rate modernization, I think, is the first step towards maybe making some, I think, inroads into the property issue. First of all, I want to introduce Miss Lori Cates. And so, Lori, if you'll make your way to the stage. Lori is the regional president, for the Southeast region for Travelers. I think she started in April of 2012, I believe. Preceding this role, she was regional vice president for Travelers, personal insurance Midwest region. Before joining Travelers, Lori also worked on the dark side with Nationwide, where she led the Great Lakes sales team for 6 years. She's also spent time with Kemper, and during that time with Kemper, she was in North Carolina, Ohio, and other countrywide assignments. And she's also a graduate of Wheaton College as well. So would you make welcome a really good friend of IIANC's, Lori Cates. Our second panelist, Mr. Robert Herlong, Bob Herlong. Bob is a consultant with the Southern Strategy Group there in South Carolina. Prior to joining the Southern Strategy Group, Bob was the Vice President Regional Manager for the Southeast region for the Property and Casualty Insurers Association of America, commonly known as PCI, representing over 1,000 property and casualty insurance companies. His position with PCI, Bob oversaw association involvement in response to insurance-related legislation like we're talking about here in North Carolina, but not only in North Carolina, Georgia, South Carolina, Virginia, and Tennessee. Bob is also an attorney, was a graduate of the University of South Carolina School of Law there in Columbia. Welcome to Bob Herlong, please. And our last panelist is no stranger to any of you, I don't think, but he's one of our members, Tim Ward. Tim, make your way, please. Executive Vice President of Business Insurance with Sin Dunn Insurance, a small little agency, family-owned agency there in Greensboro. He's a wonderful supporter of IIANC's. Tim's got 35 years of insurance experience, and he works with clients on commercial coverages, specializing in the handling of risk and exposures associated with large manufacturers, suppliers, and professional offices. I will also tell you that Tim really brings, I think, a specialty to this panel group. As well, he serves on the board of directors of the North Carolina Reinsurance Facility and the Piedmont chapter of the CPCU Underwriters, or CPCU Society. He currently chairs the IIANC Technical Committee, for which really brought first the origination of the bill that we're talking about today, and also serves on the IIANC Insurance Advisory Committee. Would you make welcome the UNC Chapel Hill graduate, Tim Ward. Well, let's get started, and I hope our volume's okay here. We do have a lively discussion. There will be a time, panelists, for some questions, and so I know you have your forms in front of you there at each table. Also, I've asked at the conclusion for our own Stuart Powell to give you just a very quick synopsis of the bill that will be introduced in this session of the legislature before, I think originally will be in on the state Senate side of the chamber. So. Panelists, thank you again. This is not a new issue to North Carolina. In fact, I talked about it. I talked about our involvement a couple of years ago in the last session. There were two bills actually that were brought up. There was a State Farm bill that really looked at more of a quicker approach to some of the things that we're talking about today. That was not something that we were a party of. There was another bill that we were a party of that calls for some things that we're talking about today, and that is incremental change to what we think is an archaic system. I heard another good friend of our association, the commissioner yesterday in the legislative committee, tell the legislative committee that the system is not broken. I would tend to disagree with that statement. So Bob, I'm going to ask you first. You've got experience in South Carolina, and you know very well what the situation is here in our state. Is the system broken?
Well, first let me say how much I appreciate this invitation and opportunity to participate. I love talking to agents. Didn't always get to do that during my career. When I was in management, they would say, don't get too close to our agents. And I would say, well, why? Because they have all the political power. And they would tell me, well, that's exactly it, because we don't always agree on everything. But it is nice to be with you. I heard the commissioner describe the beach plan situation as a ticking time bomb, and I would more describe that and the current car insurance system here in North Carolina as a armed nuclear warhead. If you can envision with me this great big rocket in a silo with the steam coming out, headed right towards the Capitol in Raleigh. So I think the beach plan, the reinsurance facility, the rating law, the entire regulatory system in North Carolina is completely broken.
Lori, is the system broken?
Wow, that one's a tough one to follow. Let me first say thank you, Kelly, for asking Travelers and me personally to represent the company here today. I have moved to North Carolina, as Kelly said, 9 months ago. And prior to that, I've worked in a number of other states, primarily in personal insurance. So when I arrived in North Carolina back in April, my accountabilities are personal insurance and business insurance. And was brought up to speed very quickly by Ron Stevens and George Markosius. Some of you in the room probably know him, and Mr. Milletti as well, as far as the uniqueness of the North Carolina system. And I think it's only human nature to try to relate your current situation to something that you've experienced in the past, or something that's relatable to you. So as I was listening to George and Ron, and even though I worked in North Carolina market 20 years ago, I'm having a hard time grasping why are we so different than the other 49 states. And my experience was across probably about a dozen states in the Midwest as well as the Mid-Atlantic, the systems that work the best, the states that have the rating plans that I believe are most mutually beneficial to the consumer, the agent, as well as the carrier, have some common characteristics. First and foremost, they're very transparent. The consumer knows what they're being charged. They know who's being subsidized, and it's very evident and clear to them. The second thing is for companies that they are able to utilize the rating systems that they have in other states, so there's some flexibility to replicate and have that speed to market to use very similar systems from one state to the next. And then lastly, and this is where I really am challenged, is actuarially sound. In most states, you're able to use a multivariate type rating, where you take into consideration a lot of different variables to create your pricing structure. Most states accept that. Now, some have modified versions of that, but most states accept something like that, where you have the data either in-house or from industry data to actuarially justify why you're charging what you're charging for a certain household composition. When I look at North Carolina, and I will start with transparency, we surcharge consumers, they don't know it. Fairness, is it fair that some groups of folks are subsidizing other folks? I don't necessarily think that's fair or actuarially sound. So is it broken? I won't be quite as strong as Bob, but I will say there's definitely opportunity to improve, and I always step back and say, how can the 49 other states be so similar, and we have North Carolina that's so unique, and why can't we adopt some of those things that are working so well in the other 49 states? So as we look at proposals, those are the characteristics we look for, that transparency, actuarially sound, and the flexibility from an operational standpoint where we can utilize those pricing structures, the forms, the coverages that we're using in other states to get some economies of scale. Because right now, everything we do today in North Carolina has to be custom built just for North Carolina. And then we build another model for the other 49 states. So it's not a cost-effective system or flexible system for the organization as well. So is it completely broken? No. But the bottom line, I think there's enough commonality where even though there's different ideas and perspectives out there, as the commissioner said, find those commonalities that we all share and incrementally reform the program that we have today.
Good. Tim, you've heard Lori, you've heard Bob. As I made your introduction, you're on the board to the facility.
I came prepared.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
I want y'all to know that I thought about this before I came today. I wear several different hats in this room today. I have an agent's hat, and I also have an Independent Agents Association hat, and I would have a facility hat with me, but they're so frugal, which is probably a good thing, they don't have a hat. But I want you to know, I'm not speaking for any one of these groups up here today, but I will say that I feel like I'm representing those of you in this room. And I feel that way when I go to a facility board meeting. I feel that way when we have committee meetings at the association. And I think we want to make sure we're doing what's best for our clients, the citizens of North Carolina. The system does absolutely have some challenges to it that certainly need to be addressed. We're trying to find incremental change. I'm very leery of throwing the baby out with the bathwater in this situation. I'm kind of a unique seat for the last 5 years sitting at the facility board meetings and hearing what goes on there, and through the association and dealing with our clients. And if we can make some incremental change to take some air out of the balloon, to correct some of the inequities, to address some of the issues the carriers have, I think that's kind of the direction we want to go, and I think that's what we're feeling around trying to find. We're trying to find compromise. The system is antiquated. There are some things about it that you wouldn't do today if you were starting over again.
Yeah.
And so I hope we can work through, in this meeting being part of the process, how do we get from where we are to where we need to be without wrecking the whole system?
Well, to go back, one of your caps, being a part of our association's technical committee, the bill that we're looking at, the draft language, came from our technical committee. It was passed on to your legislative committee and then on to your board of directors for confirmation of something that the association wanted to support. As I said, back in the 2012 session, there was a special committee that was formed in the interim to talk about this issue. As it relates to that commission, I'm going to read a statement to you and then ask for your comments on it. Lee Morton, who is the Regional Vice President for Nationwide Insurance, spoke before this commission. And Mr. Morton spoke about the healthy, robust, competitive, diverse, and low-cost auto insurance system that currently exists in the state. And he cited concerns for the unintended consequences changing the system that it will have on North Carolina drivers. And I quote Mr. Morton. Mr. Morton said, "North Carolina's insurance system is fair to all drivers, protects consumers from unjustified rate hikes, and encourages everyone to buy insurance to the public's widespread benefit. Scrapping the current system will lead to an increase in insurance premiums for about 992,000 policyholders. And we do not believe the people of North Carolina want higher auto insurance rates, less independent oversight, more uninsured drivers, or a more volatile insurance market." Tim, what do you think about Mr. Morton's statement?
I have some questions about it. He's not completely wrong, but throwing out a number of 992,000 people getting a rate increase, I'm a little doubtful about that. Let's be honest. We are in the cost-shifting business. In the insurance business, that's what we do. We aggregate funds and then allocate them back to those that we share risk with to pay for their loss. A lot of us, we pay a small certain loss, the premium on the policy, to avoid a large uncertain loss, a traffic accident, fatality, that kind of thing. That's what we do. What you want it to do is you want it to be fair and equitable, and you want to be transparent and explain what you're doing. There is cost shifting always going on. In our business, there is legal discrimination, and then there's illegal discrimination. I don't think this is illegal discrimination, but if we made major changes in the rate structure and the facility, we all know as insurance industry members that you're going to see some people pay more and some pay less. Somebody who is a clean risk with no points but has just had a DUI 3 years and a month ago, they're going to see their rates go up, no doubt about it. the elderly who you probably don't want to insure, my mother and my mother-in-law right now, they're little dings and scratches all over their cars, but you can put them in the facility and everybody's okay. But her rates would go up. An inexperienced or a slightly experienced operator who's just come off inexperience that carriers might not want to write at that price, they'll see a rate increase. Some people, and they will see a decrease. What we're trying to find is that middle ground of what's fair in making those changes.
Bob, what about some of those issues that were expressed from Nationwide representative?
Well, I have a lot of respect for Lee. He was one of the first people I spoke to when I was assigned to try to work on the beach plan reform. He and Susan Valori, who I've known for many, many years, said we would be wasting our time, but they were more than supportive. I worked for Nationwide for 13 years. I have very high respect, not only for Lee, but that entire organization. I can only respond to Lee's opinions by stating the facts. My daddy used to tell us growing up on the farm that everybody is entitled to their own opinion, but usually there's only one set of facts. And the effort of an advocate is to try to find the facts and ignore the opinions. So I'm going to share with you briefly what happened in South Carolina, what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. That's the only way I can respond completely to Lee's comments. In 1975, a new auto insurance reform law passed that did a lot of things. It created, of course, the reinsurance facility. The plan of operation provided for 3 servicing carriers. Those 3 servicing carriers were awarded contracts without bids on a cost-plus basis. That's to say that the more claims they paid, the more money they made. So there was room for moral hazard beyond belief. The law also created a uniform merit rating plan and a uniform classification plan, which in essence leveled the rates for all companies, for all consumers, except based on driving record. So what happened after that law passed? Almost immediately, the reinsurance facility population increased to 43% of the driving population. Almost 200,000 drivers, almost overnight, went directly into the reinsurance facility. The non-standard market left, again, almost overnight. Reminded me of the Baltimore Colts when they left Baltimore. Other companies withdrew. They developed strategies to avoid writing business. At the time, I represented Allstate, and they closed all of their shops in the Sears stores, moved all of those agencies to the suburbs. Many companies, many agents were required to have appointments made in order to write insurance. Companies got very creative in how they managed their business. Many terminated agency contracts, or at least tried to, resulted in a whole lot of litigation. The agents were saying, "You're terminating me because of my loss ratio," which in fact they probably were. Recoupment was part of the new law and a very critical component of its ultimate demise. The recoupment was based on driving record. If you had 0 points, your annual recoupment fee was $49. If you had 2 points, which would be a ticket for going more than 10 miles over the speed limit, that was a $670 surcharge. If you had 5 points, which I do now, the surcharge was $1,700. If you had 10 or more, it was $3,400. And if you had a DUI, it was almost $4,300. So what happened? If I had thought about it, I would have formed my own insurance company and written just the people convicted of DUIs. So the people with the high recoupments suddenly became the most profitable part of the business. 95% of the voluntary market, that what little bit remained, was written by direct writers. In 1995, the reinsurance facility deficit for that year approached $201 million. By the time the facility went out of business, its accumulated deficit was in excess of $2.5 billion. This scenario, if you will, continued for 22 years. It got to be gutter ball politics, hardball politics, the kind you don't want to let your mama know about. And that war went on for 22 years, primarily because the industry was divided, just like it is here. The insurance commissioner was opposed to any change, just like he is here. And the designated agents, who I spoke to you about earlier, were fighting for their lives, because without this law, they felt like they would not have a business. Sometime during this process, Bob Hunter commented in the National Underwriter. He said, South Carolina has the best car insurance system in the country. It's just real expensive. And that sustained me for another 10 years. Excuse me. So after all that, and after I put my two daughters through college, thanks to all this work, a law finally passed in 1997. As a result of that law, the number of auto insurance writers in South Carolina has doubled. The non-standard writers have returned to the state. The reinsurance facility phased out. The assigned risk plan that took its place now has how many policies? 5, from almost 200,000. Business is much less concentrated in the direct writers, and a little unappreciated segment of the law that managed to work itself in there was the implementation of a 7 plus or minus % flex rating band. What that did was repeal the so-called prior approval law and allowed carriers to file within a flex band for increases or decreases of 7%. That became critical, and I'm not going to tell you that everything's rosy in South Carolina, although it was for 10 years after 1997. These issues have bubbled up again in Columbia, thanks primarily to the trial lawyers who have seen an opportunity to change the law regarding the appointment of the insurance director. They would choose to have that position elected just as it is here. That has stirred up the pot, and so as we speak, there's a ongoing legislative process to investigate this entire regulatory system that has worked so well for the past 10 plus years. So will there ever be calm in South Carolina? No. Will there ever be in North Carolina? Probably not. But I can guarantee you, you'll have markets, the consumers will be best served, and you'll be happy you did it. But let me also say, nobody's paying me to be here. You all are paying for my mileage and hotel and hopefully dinner. But I'm on nobody's payroll. But again, it's a pure joy for me to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Tim, again, let's get back to the facility. All right, there are some numbers that are pretty staggering. Share with the group, if you will, about the number of drivers in the facility, especially compared to the rest of the nation. If you don't mind, talk about the financial standing of the facility and what that bank account looks like.
Okay. There's good news, bad news in these numbers. If you've not paid a lot of attention, I'll be honest, I've learned a lot serving on the board. The facility has an operating budget of about $6.5 million, which is between 0.5% and 1% of the $760 million of written premium that they handle. They process 28 million transactions a year through their Edge system. A lot of this stuff used to be manual. The companies were raising Cain about it. Over the last 2 years, it's been migrated where it's essentially all automated, which helps a lot. Not perfect, but helps a lot. This past year, no rate changes for private passenger clean risk autos last year. There was about a 1% reduction for other than clean risk, about a 4.5% reduction for commercial autos in the facility. They've got 1.1 million policies in there. 97% of those are private passenger auto, between 2 and 3% commercial autos, trucks. 76% of those policies are clean risk policies, which means no SDIP points active and at least 2 years of driving experience. We calculate there are about 1.5 million drivers represented by the policies in the facility. In North Carolina, the automobile marketplace is about $4.95 billion in total premium, and that's for liability, comp, collision, all in. Of that, about $3 billion is liability premiums, $760 million in the facility. Out of that $3 billion, about 25% of the premiums. It has been within 2 points of 25% every year, basically since the facility started in the 70s. Very consistent, the same percentage of the marketplace, and that's a function of how the rates are determined and risk-taking by the carriers and what people are incented to do. The facility has about $800 million in reserves, and that is to back up the $760 million of premiums and unpaid claims. One thing that's a little unique, because the facility is a creature of the legislature, and they could rule tomorrow morning that we're going to shut it down, it's got to be prepared on a day's notice to write checks to clear the books. Everything has to be able to be refunded, all claims have to be paid, and that's a little unique in the insurance world, that you've got to be ready on every day to shut the books down. You know, in theory, travelers could do that, but not on one day. There's $90 million of surplus in the facility, and the surplus is the members' or carriers' equity in the plan. At one time, it was $120 million to the negative. Now, that was when we weren't charging enough. We've recouped monies, built it up. We're now $90 million to the good. We're trying to bleed that number down some to something in the range of $50 million, and most of the give back on that is on the personal lines side, where we are changing the recoupment figure. This is a pay-as-you-go system. It has to, by law, it has to break even every year now under the current rules, and the recoupment adjustment is really the only lever that the facility has to maneuver with to impact that. So I hope that gives you a picture of what we're talking about in size and numbers of policies and dollars for the reinsurance facility.
And more drivers in the facility than all 49 other states combined. Easily.
That would be correct, significantly more than all other 49 states combined.
Thank you. Lori, you alluded in your kind of opening statement there about new markets being introduced, especially into North Carolina, that are introduced in other states because of the system that we have here. Our agents, our members are not able to see some of those new products. Talk about that a little bit, if you will, please.
Be happy to, Kelly. Travelers is very invested in forward thinking as far as services that we need to provide for that value add, products we want to introduce, being aware of the technology that's now out there that we can take advantage of, whether it's for claim settlement or for new products or endorsements that we want to test in the market. And I use the word test because that is exactly how we approach innovation, is if we believe whether it's new technology or a coverage is now needed in the marketplace or there will be a demand for something, we identify the states that we want to pilot that coverage in. So I want to answer this question by giving you an example.
Sure.
There's an endorsement that we have in a number of states. It's called IntelliDrive. And essentially what IntelliDrive is, it's a GPS device that a consumer would put in their car and we would measure the mileage. So it's basically pay-as-you-go type coverage. Not for everyone, it's an endorsement, but with the new technology that's out there, it's getting more and more affordable. And as you know, consumers are always looking for ways to save dollars on their insurance premiums. So as an organization, we need to test that. So we've invested in the technology. We identified 3 states to test this product in: Virginia, Ohio, and Illinois. And why did we pick those states? Good demographics, good variety of demographics, but also the ease of working with their regulatory systems in order to introduce a new pricing point that we wanted to test, as well as a new marketing approach. So I give that as an example because that type of test and learn approach for coverages and services that a company wants to introduce, it would not be cost effective for us to introduce that type of pilot program in North Carolina. And here's why. Let's say we built IntelliDrive and tested it in North Carolina. And the agents liked the product, introduced it to, let's say, older drivers that didn't drive a lot, or couples with teenage drivers where they could monitor where they drive to. So they saw marketability with this endorsement. Let's say it was a huge success in North Carolina. And we decided as an organization, yes, let's roll it out. Well, guess what? The rollout time it's going to take for us to get it to the other 49 states, we have to start all over. Because North Carolina is so unique from a pricing system, the systems we have to build, the forms we have to file, there's no scale. So because we started in Virginia, Ohio, and Illinois, and it's a marketable product, now it can quickly be rolled out to the other states. Guess where North Carolina is in line for that? So that's the challenge that we have, and from a personal standpoint, having accountability for this region now, I want to be in a region where we are the innovators. We're sitting right now in the Research Triangle Park area, the innovation capital of North Carolina, and we're talking about the inability to be innovative in insurance. And it's very frustrating for me personally now, but that's just an example of what happens when 49 other states have that ease of doing business and introduction of new coverages and services, and versus a state where everything's unique and custom built, if you will. It is just not cost effective, and therefore the innovation is not as quick to market, and the speed to market in North Carolina don't equate.
Thank you. A lot of people try to somewhat couch this whole subject solely on rates. And again, my good friend, the Commissioner Goodwin, told the committee yesterday, North Carolina has the 8th lowest rates in the nation. Isn't the issue a lot more than rates? Bob?
Suppressed rates always drives business to the residual market. Let me say it differently. Suppressed rates always drives business to the residual market. That's what's happened here. That's what's happened in South Carolina. That's the facts. And that's what's the problem. Rates here have always been suppressed, resulting in huge, unfair cross subsidies that the consumers just do not know about. But when they do, and I think you all will make sure they find out, that's when that rocket is going to fire off and hit the Capitol in Raleigh.
Tim, a little bit about rates. I mean,
The eighth lowest, and we've heard Commissioner Long for years said fifth lowest. That was his party line. We've now gone to eighth, and I looked at the numbers. It doesn't make $10 difference if you're in that band in that range there. So it's not worth arguing about. We do have low rates. We may have artificially low rates depending on how you look at it, or at least some people are getting a reduced rate they may not deserve. It also depends on what you count. Are you counting total premium, or are you just counting liability only? Are you figuring in what the state minimum limits are for the different states, what the requirements are? Do you include the recoupment in that number, or do you not include the recoupment in that number? But I guess my bottom line is it doesn't make a whole lot of difference. We're in a band. We're in a very good shape rate cost-wise in North Carolina. I think the big issue is how is that allocated? There are other reasons why our rates are low. We hope it's because of law enforcement. It's because of good highways. There are a lot of factors that go into it besides just automobile insurance rates.
And Lori, I'll go back to your comments about travelers, especially doing business in North Carolina. I mean, if we were to adopt reform in this state, how does that reduce administrative costs, expenses of filings, as experienced under the current system?
Yeah, it'd be tremendous. And for exactly that reason I just shared with you as far as speed to market and innovation and being able to be first to market for travelers on new products, coverages, et cetera. So for us, it's more than just a pricing play. It truly is coverage options for a consumer, differentiating your value proposition as you're selling to a consumer, giving them more options as far as coverages, price, etc. So having that operating efficiencies, having that ability to scale across the country versus custom built for North Carolina, it's a whole different set of circumstances for an organization.
And if you let me continue kind of down that line just a little bit. So in the language that we've seen as far as the language that will be introduced into legislation in a couple of weeks, there is an option, and I already talked about this earlier, but an option of staying within the rate bureau system, or they can move to a flex banding system. So a flex system, wouldn't that still give the Commissioner of Insurance the ability to somewhat control, monitor the rates, but at the same time allow companies like Travelers the flexibility to adequately price your products?
Absolutely, Kelly. And I'll go back to your quote that Lee Morton had mentioned as far as unjustified rates. Again, having worked in multiple states, companies still have to file their rate and demonstrate how they're actuarially justified. It's not just file and go crazy and charge anything you want. We have to justify the rates we're proposing and filing with those state regulatory departments. So in that regard, I think it's more fair, number one. You get a more refined pricing approach, and quite frankly, that allows us to give the best price possible for that household composition. And that's really, I think, where we all want to get. What does that household composition, what is the best price we can offer them based on those characteristics and the potential loss for that exposure?
Thank you. Bob?
Every state has a one-sentence law in its insurance code that says something like, rates shall not be inadequate, excessive, or unfairly discriminatory. I guarantee that's in this state's law. That's the only sentence Commissioner Goodman needs to review rates. I don't care what kind of rating law is in effect. He has that authority at any time to order a rate to be excessive, and he can deal with it. That power will never be taken away from him, and that's as simple as it gets.
Tim, let's talk a little bit more about our draft legislation. In that piece of legislation is the removal of the prohibition to use age and gender in the rate making. Don't you think this allows companies to develop a rate that's more actuarially sound, more equitable, And then also talk about the recoupment surcharge and who's paying for that surcharge.
Well, you know, as Lori was saying, every company, one nice thing about what makes a horse race, if you turn everybody loose, they're all going to have different opinions on young drivers, on elderly drivers, on number of tickets. You know, everybody will go in different directions on that, and that's not a bad thing because it gives people choices. It's very positive to have that. You know, we've been kind of horse-collared by those kind of rules, plus the file and use rules, or prior approval rules. And so a lot can change in there. Like I said, we're trying to find a middle ground to give people some choices. I will point out, though, that, you know, the recoupment, which is kind of the boogeyman in this scenario, is only $10 per car. Right now, I figured it up this week. If you divide them all out, do the math, it's about $10 per car we're paying in recoupment, which is basically subsidizing clean risk drivers in the facility who don't pay enough money to cover their losses. It's kind of like insurance on insurance in my mind. I mean, if we left everything like it is and you came out with an option for me to buy insurance on SDIP points so that I didn't have to worry about getting murdered by tickets and accidents, I'd pay a lot of money to be able to insure my SDIP points away. And if we unbundle this thing, Lori's going to give me a chance to do that, I think. But it's where do we want to collect the money? Right now, we collect it in a different way from the rest of the country. One of those features is recoupment, and right now, $10 a car.
Thank you. Last question, then I'm going to go to some of the questions from the audience. But panel, if we all know that that it is a requirement in North Carolina for automobile liability coverage. Some would say, and especially on the opposing side, would say if the current system were to be changed and the facility depopulated by the elimination of the clean risk classification, would fewer drivers purchase insurance, thus causing an increase in the number of uninsured drivers and ultimately an increase in cost for all drivers? Bob?
The data reflecting the number of uninsured motorists in any state is very, very difficult to achieve. In South Carolina, it was estimated at one time that about 35% of our people were driving without insurance. I've heard commissioners in North Carolina brag about their low population. I don't know. I've never seen the data. I don't know what it is. But I can tell you that because of recoupment, South Carolina had many, many more uninsured motorists than they do today. And I expect the same would be true here.
Lori?
Yeah, the data that I do have, and I'll reference, is the Insurance Research Council. And when they looked at North Carolina and then the neighboring states of Virginia and South Carolina, they put North Carolina at roughly 13.5% uninsured motorists, and then Virginia and South Carolina a little over 10%. So North Carolina today actually has higher uninsured motorists. So going forward, I don't know how that would develop, but those are the current stats per the insurance research.
Tim, your response?
Part of it, we were talking a little earlier on workers' comp about enforcement. Right. And I think that's certainly true here. Some of you remember when we had DMV officers in Carolina blue police cars riding around armed with screwdrivers, taking license plates off of cars. And they decided somewhere along the way to stop doing that. But now that every police car in the state has a laptop computer mounted right here, and all they got to do is this to check a license to see if you've got insurance, if we made that a priority, and that probably would need to be part of the equation, is how do you keep things in balance? If we're going to change the balance, you got to do something somewhere else. To me, that should be part of it. We've got to enforce the law to keep from having our uninsured driver population shoot up.
Thank you. I'm going to try to get to as many of these questions as I possibly can. So anyone, of course, on the panel can speak up, but we talked about this a little bit a while ago. This person actually says that North Carolina has the 7th lowest automobile liability rates in the U.S. How will this legislation help independent insurance agents and consumers? Anybody want to tackle that one?
7th lowest, that must have been Bob Mack that submitted that.
Could have been.
I think I saw him in the back of the room.
Well, no, go ahead.
Well, I got an axe to grind on this one, I will say. This is the Independent Insurance Agents of North Carolina. Let's don't forget it. And I have some real suspicions when you look at who's backing bills and what's going on here, that the independent agents would be put at a disadvantage, or our carriers would, if we just wholesale throw this thing up in the air. And part of what we're trying to do is find a compromise that allows us to, again, make incremental change, to look after our policyholders so that somebody with a $100 million ad budget can't come in and just grab market share. And that is a big concern I have about making a change in this area.
Bob?
Well, maybe the situation in North Carolina is not like it was in South Carolina, but I'd be surprised. I would expect the majority of the business is written by direct writers. Is that not true?
It is.
And so how many more millions of dollars is Allstate or State Farm wanting to invest to gain another 3% market share? I don't see that as a viable problem. I see what happened in South Carolina when the number of companies doubled when the law changed in 1997.
Lori, any comment to that?
The only thing I just want to emphasize, the word that Tim used, incremental. No one's talking about overnight completely disrupting the system, because that would not be good for the consumers or the agents, quite frankly. So incremental change, and then I think we can all benefit. Get those areas where we can agree, yes, this makes sense, common sense. We should be doing this, and go forward.
Okay. Next question. What is the loss ratio of the NC reinsurance facility?
It is a break-even proposition, because if we lose money, we immediately recoup it on the following year, as soon as we can analyze that we're losing money. And if we make money, we push it back out the door by tweaking the numbers. So it is pure break-even on that business in the facility. I will also point out that business doesn't make a profit. So you can argue if that business were transferred over to other companies, clearly there should be some profit margin in there. We would hope.
All right, here's another question. The agents do not place policies into the state pool. Why don't the companies voluntarily write coverage now instead of putting it into the pool if they want it done away with and the numbers lowered?
It's a very easy underwriting decision when you're in many ways faced with the luxury of this environment from an underwriting standpoint. You simply put all of the new business in the facility. And you, as I described, you try to keep the best of the pointed risk. I'm not sure that gets to the question, but companies, they're smart. They know how to make a profit. They know how to avoid unprofitable business, and there's not very much you can do about that.
One of the issues is we approve an expense allowance for processing the business and handling the claims of all the business in the facility, which it has to be done. I mean, the facility doesn't do it, the carriers do it. And there are some carriers who have figured the angles that they make money on the expense allowance. So if you're guaranteed not to lose money on the business you put in the facility, and you figured out how to make money on the expense allowance, that's a pretty sweet deal if you can get a point or two out of there guaranteed return every year with no risk.
Okay, the next question, and I don't mind doing this, and if they want to, but someone in the audience said, can we have someone from GMAC make a statement? And I don't know, Art, if somebody wants to do that very quickly. I know that Rick? Okay. All right, good. All right, thank you. Thank you. And again, just to be perfectly honest with you, I mean, these folks are great supporters of our members. GMAC is always at all of our functions, and I don't want to diminish the support there. We just have a point of disagreement here, and we'll let the legislative process kind of work its way through. And with that said, Stuart, I'm going to ask you to kind of make your way. Bob, I know you have kind of a closing comment that you wanted to make.
No, not really. I managed to get it off my chest just sitting here, so thanks.
All right. Well, I feel better, I can tell you. So, Stuart, if you will, and just talk the group a little bit through. And again, a bill has not been introduced yet. We expect that to happen next week, and then we expect the following week, the first week in March, for actually testimony and the committee to come together to talk about the bill. But just to give our members a little bit more of an insight, and I know we've been communicating that with you through our Raleigh report that you get every Friday. I would ask you to look at that, especially look at the members of the Senate Insurance Committee, of which this bill will go before in a couple of weeks. If you've got relationships with those members, please, this is what this session is about as well, is to inform you and better educate you as to the issues. So Stuart, if you will, just to go through that quickly.
Thank you, Kelly. I think we have some copies of the bill available. If some of you are having sleeping problems, we have a solution. We've looked at several iterations of this bill as it's kind of worked its way through the process over the last couple of years. And we did a presentation to some of the company people back in December, and we did a relatively short summary of what we think are the significant points in this bill. So we've got a much longer analysis if any of you are interested in looking at that. But just to sort of drive home, as has been said up here, it is an option. The bill does give companies the option to make an election as to whether they want to stay under the existing prior approval system or whether they want to elect to participate in what's called a flex-rated system. So companies have that choice as to whether, if they like the current system, they can stay there. The sort of heart of this bill is the flex rating bill. Bob mentioned flex rating, and basically, I mean, when we started looking at this bill a couple of years ago, I mean, we realized it's taken us almost 40 years to get into this situation. For as long as I've been in the business, I got into the business in '73, and the assigned risk plan was just going out. I was the first one in my family to experience the reinsurance facility. The rest of them, my great aunt, who got in the business in 1904, didn't experience automobile insurance at all. So, the flex rating is really the heart of this thing, and what it would do for those companies that elect to participate under the flex rating system, you would have a band, and the proposed statute has 12% in it. I'm sure that's probably legislatively negotiable. But it would have a flex. It would have an amount specified that set up a plus or minus of a filed rate. So if the 12% were to stay in there, you would have a plus 12 minus 12 of the filed rate, and the companies could file in use within that 12% as long as their rate changes in a given annual period did not exceed that 12%. They can have 2 6s, they can have 3 4s, they can have anything they want, as long as the aggregate rate change in any annual period did not exceed that flex trigger or threshold. Then the companies could, within that band, they could file in use. So the companies could, and as Lori said, I mean, the commissioner still has some oversight. It's kind of flips around to where, rather than the companies having to prove to the commissioner that the rates are meet the 3 criteria that the statutes, the companies could file the use, and then it becomes really the commissioner's problem to prove that that filing is either not adequate or is excessive or is unfairly discriminatory, which are generally the statutory parameters. So that's really the heart of the system, is that to have this flex band, every year the companies could adjust their rates based on that flex band. The other part of the bill is a phase out of the clean risk classification in the reinsurance facility. And that would take place over, I think it's either a 3 or 5 year period of time. And that would hopefully start some of the depopulation of the facility, because some of these pointed drivers who are in the facility because the 0 point rate in the underwriting decision has been made that the companies just don't want those people for one reason or another at the current 0 point rate. If you could surcharge those people 10%, 15%, whatever, they would be more inclined to take those people back into the voluntary market. Now, you know, the marketplace would start making some determinations about adequacy of rates or equity in rates rather than the sort of arbitrary system that we have now. So those are really I think the 3 key points that we've in our review of the bill that we've come to recognize as the significance of this is it is optional to the companies. You do have this flex banding thing, which a number of other states have used. One of the advantages to us in looking at the incremental way of sort of working our way out of the situation we're in is that with flex banding gives you that option, because if a company wanted to file for rates in excess of that band threshold of 12%, it goes back to the prior approval system. So it would be, the commissioner would treat it in the traditional way of hearings and determinations that he has traditionally made on rates. So it gives an area around the filed rate where the companies have the ability to set their own pricing. It has sort of a stopgap on that at the band threshold that gives the commissioner the ability to protect the consumer against very, very wild swings in pricing. And it would, we think, would give us a chance to work our way out of this system over a number of years. So that's sort of the synopsis of the bill.
All right, great, thank you. Bob?
Well, I just have to have my closing argument, I'm sorry. But again, it's a real honor for me to be here. I want you to know that we're not really talking about insurance here. We're talking about politics. We're talking about down in the gutter, hardball politics. If you choose to engage in this fight, it's going to be difficult. You have a wonderful staff. You have a wonderful lobbying team. They're going to need your support. You all are the best lobbyists in the state. I could never be as good a lobbyist as any one of you. When I first started in this business, I didn't even know a legislator. My wife said, well, they have a lot of agents. Why don't you see if they know anybody? So I asked that question. An elderly agent came up to me after the meeting and said, my younger brother is in politics. I'm not sure what he does, but they call him the speaker. And even I knew who the speaker was, but he wouldn't give me an appointment. But I had breakfast with him every Thursday morning for the next 10 years, thanks to his older brother. So you are vested with tremendous opportunity. And so I encourage you to not give it up. It took us 22 years in South Carolina. You can do it because you now have the facts. You can do it much quicker. So thanks.
Bob, with that, I'll buy your dinner. All right. I'll leave the last question with you, and if any of the panelists want to answer this, this will be the closer, okay? It says auto rates undoubtedly are going up, property rates are going up. How many salaries in this room are up? I'll leave it at that. It's a good question to ask. And let me just go one step further, and I said it was the last comment. But there is kind of a bigger prize here, I think. and that is we know, and Lori, you and I talked about it at lunch, we know that there is a property issue in North Carolina, and that is the problem. And I think most of our agents understand that and agree with that. Melody, you and I talk about it all the time. But I would propose and submit to you that that is a huge undertaking that needs to be done, and it's going to take a while to do that. And there are some factors involved with that, especially from a catastrophic issue that are not that we don't deal with in auto rate modernization. But would you not agree, if we can't make any inroads in the rating of autos here in North Carolina, where does that lead us as far as the bigger issue of property? Lori?
I think that's an excellent point, Kelly. You just, as we talked about at lunch, the homeowner / property issue is so significant for the industry, not just in North Carolina and not just a coastal issue. The pattern of weather, let me back up, the two drivers are, number one, primarily the weather patterns have changed, and this is not a global warming statement whatsoever. The weather patterns have changed. I worked the last 9 years in the Midwest, and I can tell you, work in the Tornado Alley, all of the storms that come through that don't make the national news, but I can tell you they make the local news, and they get our claims folks out in the field. Every single month we had a cat in one of those 9 states I worked in. And so we called them kittens. So the weather patterns are absolutely changing. But the other thing on the homeowner side is the intent of the homeowner policy when it was first introduced was more of a fire policy, right? Well, guess what? We kind of did it to ourselves. We've added in all these coverages, and guess what? We got all these claims for iPads, et cetera, and it just was not the intent of the policy. So there's a lot of issues surrounding it, the catastrophic exposure being the first and foremost, but there's some other underlying issues. And unfortunately, the solutions to the property piece are much more challenging than what we've talked about here today. And to keep it in perspective, I think is where you're going, Kelly, we've got to be able to come to some agreement on auto rate modernization if we're even going to think about tackling the homeowner market.
Thank you, Bob.
Well, I don't know. I would kind of encourage you to at least begin discussing the problems as a whole, even including workers' comp. I mean, why not? All of them are screwed up. Seriously. And this coastal thing is a tremendous problem. I spent a lot of time learning the facts about that, and you don't even want to get me going on it. But there's a story to be told there as well. And it has been told, and I thought and hope that as a result of the law that passed in 2009, that a lot of progress has been made. I come back here today and find out that has not been the case. So what are you going to do?
And I'll leave the last comment, of course, to one of my members. Tim, close us out.
Well, thank y'all for letting me represent you both here today and in other functions that I get involved in. I want to make sure everybody here knows that our association staff, our board of directors, and our committee members have put a lot of time and effort into these issues. This meeting here today, took a lot of work, and I hope that while we don't all agree on all of these issues, I think we can agree that we need to be talking about change, and the train is probably leaving the station. And to Bob's point, we need to be lobbying. We need to be making some phone calls, making sure that those legislators that we have contact with know that we are informed about this issue, that we can help inform them and help them understand the implications of what they're getting ready to vote on. This is a very important time in the history of our industry in North Carolina.
Thank you. With that, audience, would you give them a round of applause?
Thank you.
If you've got other questions, I think we'll kind of stay around if that's okay and answer any of those concerns. I would like to also make a pitch for our young agents that they're selling raffles. Excuse me. We're selling raffles for a weekend, I think, at a vacation beach home. So please support them in that effort. David, I think you're closing, so I'll leave it to you. Again, thank you, audience, panelists. Thank you so much for your involvement.